Hey everybody, this is Pete from the Spin Rack. We also have
Calvin Ellis, ready to rock.
today we have Nubia in the Amazons, the new series from DC Comic Books, introducing the character. What's she from the '70s? Nubia, who's Diana's sister, who's
Yep.
claimed to be made from mud to go along with. I think what is it, Harry S. Truman, in one of those backroom recordings, saying, like man made from clay, brothers made from mud, and then whatever else, we won't say it. But I always didn't like the idea that I like the Nubia that we saw
Mm,
in Super Friends. I was like, yes, she got a black. That's cool. Who cares however it is? But you remember that? Do you remember that issue where she showed up in Super Friends?
no, never read that issue. I'm
Like,
thinking you. I'm thinking you talking about the cartoon. I was like, I never remember her seeing her in the cartoon.
not in the cartoon, but in the comic book, she goes there and they have. I think there was some sort of unrest going with the superhero. So, and obviously, in every sort of Super Friends story, they all have their individual stories going on, and then they meet up in the end, just like the old Justice League stories. But they had Wonder Woman fight Nubia for like a couple panels, and I was like, and what was it, Ramona, was it Fradon? She did it, and it was some gorgeous art. So yeah, but can you tell us a little about this new series? Because I don't know much about it. I gave you my history of it, or any history you want to give of Nubia.
Well, sure. Nubia came out of the. Let's call it like some light backlash to the changes they made with Wonder Woman when they decided to make her the new Wonder Woman, and she was mod, and she had no powers, and she was running around this all white outfit, hanging out with I Ching, and doing gung fu. So now magazine, no, it was Ms. Magazine. Ms. Magazine took issue with it, saying this was the most popular female superhero, pretty much the only female superhero that really people knew, and you took away her powers and you did all this stuff. And they really pushed DC, and DC ended up bringing back Wonder Woman forward powers. But part of that story was that they were also pushing for other things. One of the things that they did push for was more racial inclusion, which a lot of people don't know. That's how we actually got Nubia, because they were also saying, well, look, look at the demographics that you have here on the island, and all the women are white. So DC said, you know what, okay, and they decided that they would, address that. They actually made the character of Nubia, and they made Nubia Wonder Woman's sister. And I remember they actually wrote a letter to Ms. Magazine. They said, okay, we've brought Wonder Woman's powers back. We gave Steve Trevor is back, so she has a love interest, and we gave her a black sister. Is there anything else that we can do? That literally, they actually literally did write that letter. So that's part of her origins too. And she was featured. I mean, in the '70s, I remember she even had her own Barbie doll modeled after her. And then she really falls off after Crisis. There's a Nubia who's introduced, but it's not the same character. Recently, she's back after this is not Infinite Frontier with DC, where they're saying all the continuity is all one thing. So we actually get the character back. And I was looking forward to it. I saw some of the cover art that they had for the upcoming series. The cover art looked good. I was like, okay, let's see what this is going to be about, since they have her as the leader of the Amazons. Well, Diana's off being anything but that right now. And that's pretty much the backstory on the character. But the writer has decided that there is going to be a transgender woman on Paradise Island. So as soon as I heard that, one eyebrow goes up, and of course, it's like, what agenda? But aside of that, story wise, I'm thinking, how exactly does this work? Because Paradise Island, Themyscira, whichever one you want to call it, is supposed to be for women. And with George Perez's treatment of the island is that the women there are reincarnated from experiences that they had in their first life. So we saw an image of a cave woman who ends up being murdered by her caveman husband, and her soul is eventually reincarnated on Themyscira. So I'm looking at this scenario and thinking, well, if this was actually somebody who was, as as the plane, as it's usually stated, who was in somebody else's body, or in the wrong gender's body, by the time they get to Themyscira, they've already been reincarnated into the proper body. So how somebody transgender would be on the island is beyond me. Now, I've done some reading. I haven't seen that anything was changed in terms of that type of continuity that Perez put in. And what's more, since DC did Infinite Frontier, all that continuity is pretty much there at the end of the day. So I'm really wrapping my head around this one as to, you know, how they were able to do this. What's the thing, other than the fact that somebody's just saying, look, this is something we need to do in its time.
Well, you raise an interesting point that if these women that were, which was I think subtly updated to, you know, going before their time, were reincarnated, and any if this cosmic this sort of cosmic thing that kind of kept hold of those souls, actually recognize, you know, people that identified with being a woman and put them in there, they probably would have become women, and they would be, you know, I'm in the right form. So that would be an interesting aspect if they were going to do that. But in this little blurb that we got from the always, you know, we got from Bleeding Cool, that, you know, I don't know. It's just one of those things where it's just trying to be topical, and they're trying to say, well, we didn't make the. I mean, I don't know. It's they know now. At least DC at least knows now that they don't have to do it first, but they're gonna get the press later. Ultimately, what I wish is they kind of would. Well, no, I don't think it's something that works for the comic book, but it's something that shouldn't, you know, like they should be like kind of steering away from the press, and they're not going to. They're going to be like, I don't know. It's just a weird thing, because how do you even work this out? Once you ask those questions, I always say, like, you try to add logic to something that fantasy, then it starts getting ridiculous. So you kind of some of the things you hop over. There's some things you can kind of hint at and try to make sense out of, that sort of thing. You know, obviously, you know, the Amazons being a part of mythology. So, and then Perez having the, you know, the Well of Souls. So when they get reincarnated, and there's all of them, there's all these people that are with them, and they all see themselves as sisters and reborn with you know, with Zeus and those sort of powers that they have. Anything that they got was from that point. So that pretty much makes sense. But it's just like it's just kind of pushing the boundaries here and trying to have a statement, when ultimately, if you wanted to do a story about a transgender character, you can go whatever, black label something else and make some new characters that, you know, you're regretfully worried about selling. So you can sell it in this Nubia thing because it's number one, and you get some you get some buzz around it, which is of course what they got. So what can I say?
The story sucks.
Well, you read the comic?
No, I'm talking the premise. The premise. The
Isn't it
women
just a
who
bit
end
of
up
the story? Or is it the whole story?
the women the story. No, the character only appears in one panel.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
it's really it's really, you know, the character is really a non-factor overall. But the premise and the press that they get for it, okay, Perez's thing pretty much solves your problem if you want to deal with this. If you were go the whole route with it, I'm not, you know, I'm not going to bring anything up for argument. You are in the wrong body, okay, sexually. You're in the wrong body. All right, all the women who go to Themyscira are women who experience trauma in their lives. I think that counts as trauma. You know, not being in the right body that you're supposed to be. It's okay, great. So you go to Themyscira. Now you could have somebody relating. You could have somebody relating their experiences of those particular things without, okay, without having to go for the low hanging fruit, I suppose, of you know, the rah rah and press. You could do some really good story with that at the end of the day. However, then it becomes a complication of, oh, this, that, and the other, and so on and so forth, because this is now somebody who's a woman as opposed to somebody who's transgender. So you want that there on the island, but Perez's thing solves that, and you can still have the story dynamic in terms of that person's story. that's something you could definitely still get at the end of the day. But then you don't get the same buzz for it if you do it that way. And then you get all of the questions that come over because well, I don't want to go down that rabbit hole, but the obvious questions do come up if that's the situation, because this is supposed to be an island for women. Okay, and if you say, well, in the soul, this is a woman. Well, you got the Well of Souls. You saw that 20, 30 years before you even got to this storyline.
Mhm.
So in terms of the writing, it's like you already have, I mean, if you want to call it a do it machina, you already have it right there where you could do that, not make it, it's not problematic. It's already solved, and you could still tell the same story. Instead, you got this thing here where it's more of a force fit. And so where do you go with it from there? Because for me, it just breeds more questions and becomes problematic. But the milieu that we have right now is that it's just supposed to be there, and if you object to it, you're supposed to be shouted down and defenestrated, and that's supposed to be the end of you at the end of the day. But story wise, in terms writing wise, it doesn't really hold up when you have things that are already there to use that would allow you to facilitate a much easier, simpler transition of story and leave you with more storytelling, as opposed to just people posing questions. Well, what about this and what about that?
Well, Stephanie Williams talks about, on Twitter. It said if you've read Nubia and the Amazons won, the answer to your burning question is yes. There are trans Amazons, so that means there are multiple ones up here. One of the newest Amazons is a black trans woman. And then
Well,
was
how I feel about that.
going towards the end, Baya, or that's a but it's named after a Titan, so I can't go to that joke. But
That's the name, Baya.
yeah, but it's named after the Titan goddess, so the same name. Not that because she's, So it says Maya will have a role on Themyscira beyond just existing. She isn't just set dressing, she's just a box of ticks. She's a fully fledged character that is important to her community, just as trans women are important to us in real life. So there we have it. The thing we've been asking. What do they say about What do they say on that? They said on a couple sites. Thing no one's been asking about. They answered it. So I don't know. It's is it give the writer a pat on the back for
No,
question that everyone supposedly asked.
again, nobody asked this question. Nobody cared.
So yeah,
No, it's just
it's
again, you're sacrificing story potential for buzz. Okay, and buzz or bounce, whatever you want to call it, it's fleeting. It doesn't last. You will get some people in there, you'll get some numbers, and then people stay based on the storytelling. They stay based on how well they're going to be entertained by what you're creating. And like, okay, if you just throw that in there, great. You'll get your buzz. But if you can, if you're crafting, a story that's going to be able to bring people in, okay, keep them interested. And I honestly think what I'm proposing would be more interesting, at the end of the day. Okay, because you would have somebody, okay, they're in the right body, but they still have all the experiences, okay, of what they had to go through in their previous life. I mean, what's this cat's? Are you familiar with the the Greek prophet Tiresias?
only by name. Only by name. I don't know what is
Yeah,
it.
Tiresias is this prophet, and long story short, in terms of the myth, he ends up, it's either one or two things. He either ends up spending like equal time as both a man and a woman, because he asks one of the gods, he wants to know what it would be. He starts off as a man and says, I would like to know what it's like to be a woman. So she's like, okay, great. So she transforms him, and so like from sun up to sundown he's a man, and then he's a woman, and then he's a woman afterwards. But that was the Greek kind of explanation for hermaphrodite, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So that's somebody you could say, okay, fine. If he was to be reincarnated on the Well of Souls, he would definitely be a woman, but he would have all these experiences as a man as well. Okay. And that's something you could definitely put into play on Themyscira, because this is somebody who's like, well, no, a lot of the stuff that you guys are talking about, is it accurate? Because I actually had to live my life. I had to live my life, with this sort of duality going on. And that's something you could definitely put in. That's somebody who can talk to how the other half lives, you know, and even how the other half, if you will, lives. And you could get a lot of good writing out of that if that's where you want to go in terms of character. This is just, hey, this is razzle dazzle, but all of those things are fleeting. They don't last.
I don't know that going into that something like that really, you know, goes into the question is the person okay, right? Because you have Zeus, you have the fact that they're reincarnated, you have all these things that could lead, and then people would say, well, no, this person is fine as they are, but then there's some change involved, and then you have these things that can, as you were saying, so it's like you have some elements of magic to kind of introduce into this thing where ultimately would lead them just to be women. And no one would say anything, or if you could get some sort of dialogue with Zeus, that sort of thing. But I don't know, they're trying to add something in here that to them makes sense, but to the world it doesn't. It makes sense to people that are in Hollywood, or I guess in the community, to say, oh yeah, it's something that we would want to know, because if the kids are going and they see Paradise Island, it's like, what about me? What about me being on there? And it's like,
You're not on there.
so it's
That's the thing. You're not. The whole thing about, well, if you're a kid and you have, like, you're a kid and you have asthma, do you really need to have a hero who has asthma in order to thrill with the adventures of your particular favorite superhero? I would say no, because these guys aren't real and it's all imagination anyway. So I don't need to imagine somebody who's in the exact same condition as myself in order to thrill along with the adventures. The story is supposed to bring me in. The suspension of disbelief is supposed to bring me in. If the only way that I can make this I can make the jump there is to make this as real as the world that I have, then it's not a story anymore. So that's the whole idea when you're storytelling. It's a story. You have your elements, you go with it, and you're supposed to captivate people with your skill and your craftsmanship when it comes to the story. If the only way this person can get into it is that you're checking boxes, it's not a story anymore. That's a quota.
well, I guess the only thing I had to add here is that we've, in this sort of buzz around this character and what they plan to do is make him a full-fledged character, is, supporting characters get their moments. They're not supposed to be sitting around. You're sitting around there, as much as you give, and I always have to use the example of Eric Masterson's, as much as you try to well-round Eric Masterson's character, is how much you take away from Thor, and then when those people who've been reading Eric Masterson leaves for some other book or becomes a hero on his own, then they leave with him because they've been reading Eric Masterson and not Thor. So that's one of the things. Say, well, Thor's been in this book for a while. I can kind of explore this character. And it's like you can't. You don't have time for it. You don't have time to kind of do this stuff, and there's no buzz about the story itself. So that's kind of, ultimately the writer should be like, I don't, I did it, but I don't really want to be asking, and I don't be want to ask no questions about this. I did it, yeah, but I did the story where Nubia fights Darkseid, and it's a big battle between that, and nobody talked about my story. They're talking about my supporting this characterization bit that you could take out and put anywhere in any other book, which people kind of lose when they are fighting for these things, where it's like, is any of the comic book stories getting any kind of light here? Nope. Let's just go to what we think is what the people want, is this buzz stuff. So that's all I got for it.
And I guess we'll leave it there.
All right. So Spinner Rack
Out.